Okay, so it's January 18th, 2019. We're here in Mom and Dad's home, the farm, Packard Oaks, and they're going to tell us about the Browns in Nome.
Willie and Virginia Brown were the only members of the church in Nome, and they had lived there for many years. They went, golly, how many years ago? But they probably been there 20 or 30 or 40 years. They were there, and they owned the theater. The only theater was in town, a movie theater. And in fact, one time we had to take over the theater. She ran the ticket counter, and I ran the video, the big cameras up in the attic. And we ran them for 2 weeks while they were in the lower 48, they call it, vacationing. And anyway, they were the only other members of the church, and I'd already gotten permission from the church to hold our meetings in our home, which we did, and I was designated as the group leader. And all we had is just Willie and Virginia and you and Chad and Mom, and you were not even primary age yet. But anyway, we had church every Sunday, and Willie, he had a word of wisdom problem when I arrived. He had tobacco, and I was able to help him in 3 months. We cleaned it up, and so he was able to do the sacrament, and I was able to do the sacrament, and so we had the sacrament every week, and we had a short talk and lesson, and no primary, no MIA, of course, and
no Relief Society either.
no, I don't remember.
And we didn't do priesthood either.
Well, we did have a leadership meeting. Willie and I met to decide who's going to do what and who was going to give a lesson and things. And I was a returned missionary, so I was pretty well prepared. Anyway, we'd have it in our living room, and then right afterwards we had dinner. So they came to dinner every Sunday at our place, and they closed the theater on Sunday. So we were able to take care of that.
But it's interesting, we always knew if there were members of the church who just came in on the planes, and we always made sure that we had them come and be with us, and they usually did. Not very often, but usually they did. But we did have an engineer that was sent up there from his company from the lower 48, and Nick was his name.
Anyway, his name was Nick, and he stayed for quite a few months.
And he was a high priest. Remember that, Bob? He was a high priest, but he always came to church, and he'd always eat with us too, because he didn't have family or anything. So he was always there, a part of the family and stuff like that. And others, if they came, we always invited them to stay for dinner and stuff.
We did some research to find out how long it had been since missionaries were there, and we came out that the only time was back in the gold rush days, which was 60, 70 years before, which was really just right after the turn of the century of 1900. And so anyway, we contacted the missionary department and got 2 missionaries to come in to Nome, Alaska for the first time, named Elder Lombardi and Elder Stratford. And when we knew that they were coming, I knew that they would be finished in 3 days, because Nome was small, with total population a little above 2,000 is all, counting the Eskimos and part Eskimo and Howleys. They call the white people Howleys. Anyway, so I knew that would not work out, that they would be here a few days and then would go home. And so I thought, I talked it over. I really worried and fussed with that one and made it a very, very serious matter of prayer. I remember even going up onto Anvil Mountain just by myself and getting in the rocks there, which is not a very big mountain. It's just like a small... We'd call it a small hill. Anyway, I got into the rocks and really made a very serious matter of prayer. And on the way down from the mountain, it was so clear that it pushed, the message came very strong, that it pushed me right down to the car, and I just hit the brakes as hard as I could, and thanked the Lord for answering, because the answer is what I'd worked on, and that was that we would split them up, and I would take one elder, and Willie Brown would take the other elder, and we would introduce those missionaries at every door, which we did. It was very, very successful. And of course, the other churches, there were
7. There were 7 churches.
7 other churches there, and they really, they got it hitting hard against the Mormons and the Book of Mormon and things, because we placed a lot of Book of Mormons, a lot of first discussions, and baptized, well, we doubled our group, which wasn't very many. We had another, with counting Nick, anyway, one of the young men that we baptized went on a work mission for the church.
Well,
And who was the lady?
Willie and Virginia sent him, honey,
Yeah.
on a work mission into Seattle, and then we baptized Margaret. Margaret was a crippled woman, and she did join the church.
But the missionaries were there about 3 months,
Yeah.
maybe 4 at the most.
Mm.
And we covered every home, knocked on every door, and it was interesting just to close this up a little bit. Many years later, I was a stake president in Plano, and they were dividing the stake, and it was Elder Busha that came to help divide the stake. He was a 70 from Salt Lake, and we had already done everything and got it all divided. And I said, "Would you like to go out and swim in the pool?" And so she
told
did.
him, well, go ask him if he'd like to go swimming and relax.
We went out there and we were just bobbing along, and he says, "Why don't you tell me about yourself a little bit?" He had already asked me to be the new stake president of the McKinney stake. That's the one that's forming, and I'd only been a stake president 6 months, so I hadn't served very long in Plano. Anyway, he said, "Tell me about yourself." And I don't know why I started out about Alaska. And he just stopped and he looked at me like that, and he says, "You gotta be kidding. I just got back from Nome, Alaska, and I dedicated a chapel in Nome, Alaska." And I thought, no, it couldn't be. We didn't have enough members for that. He says, "Well, there are now." Anyway, just to make how the Lord sometimes makes the big circle and comes back and say, "Hey, what you did, look what you got now." They put 2 apartments, if you remember correctly, when we went. They have apartments above the chapel where the missionaries live, and so they have 2 missionaries there full time now in Nome, and the population has gone up. I think it's almost doubled. It's 4,000 something.
You have a ward?
No, it's still but they have a chapel. Wasn't a ward, was it?
Mm-mm.
It was a branch still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
So,
let me go ahead.
I think that the dog team the Diderot dog sled competition, I think that's what's kind of brought it more into the light of, more people are moving there because of that. Because it wasn't really that famous when we were there, although we saw it.
Yeah, twice we saw them come in. It's anyway, the end of the trail from Fairbanks by dog team all the way to Nome. And Nome is the end of the trail, and so it gets into the news quite a bit. But there's really very little to do in Nome. One theater, which was owned by Willie Brown. They had a bowling alley.
And we never did go there.
A couple of restaurants, and not much.
Anyway,
let me finish this one off with the trip that we had when we took you and your wife, because Ann did get to go, didn't she?
No.
No, that was before. Anyway,
But it was all the couples.
Just a couple. Just say the
just the couples. There was 10 of us that got to go. Those who were lived in Nome and those who were born in Nome, all got to go with their companion, and we went on a trip to Alaska and a side trip to Nome. And it was really a special trip. We went up there and saw the chapel and the missionaries and people who were members. And we went fishing, caught some fish, had one of the restaurants cook it for us and ate it, and brought back great memories. And still not very big place, but they,
It's a beautiful place.
yeah, a lot of memories.
Wonderful.